ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुदस्तुन्यन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः. We were discussing the 23rd verse of the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We already completed that. The 24th and 25th and also the 26th, 7th, these are all somewhat interconnected. 24th also we discussed Aham hi sarvayajnanam bhokta cha prabhureva cha nadumam abhijananti tattvena adhischayanti te. This also we discussed. We may have our own idea of God, of the absolute reality, and our own idea of worshipping or meditating, paying respect to different traditions, but all these different forms of worship ultimately reach the same destination, Atman or Brahman, the all-pervading spiritual reality. We discussed already. And the 25th also we discussed, depending upon our own taste and temperaments, we may choose, we may conceive of the absolute reality depending upon our own temperament. And we reach the destination according to our temperament. In other words, I shall try to explain this a little more elaborately. What is the idea of God? So there are two ways of conceiving the absolute reality. The simple way of conceiving the absolute reality is one supreme presiding deity who is the creator of this world, who gives rules and regulations, who decides the destinies of the entire creation. That's a very simple, straightforward concept. It is accepted in Vedanta, but Vedanta also gives us a higher and much more philosophical and a more universal outlook. We can always begin our idea of God as the creator, the compassionate sustainer, protector of the entire creation. That is fine, that's how we begin. But as we evolve in our spiritual life, you find our idea of God also evolves. It moves forward. As we get closer and closer to the reality of the presence of the divine within our own being, then we don't accept what we believed earlier, but we go beyond that. And as we reach the highest destination, then we believe of the absolute reality as the source of everything. I mentioned this earlier in the Bhagavad Purana, there is an interesting dialogue between a great philosopher king and 9 sages. A very interesting dialogue. It's called Nimi Navayogi Sambada. It means a dialogue between a king, a philosopher king called Nimi, and 9 sages. It comes in the 11th section. So one simple question that is put to these sages, that the king asks these sages, is this: who is an ideal devotee? Who is the really spiritual person? It's a very interesting, very simple question. And the answer is also very interesting. The answer is not like, well, somebody who goes to a place of worship every day, who reads a book every day, who believes in something. Not at all. That's something very interesting. The answer in Sanskrit is Sarva Bhudeshu Yapashyed Bhagavad Bhavam Atmanaha Bhudani Bhagavadi Atmani Esha Bhagavadottamaha. This is a verse. The meaning is simple. Who is the highest devotee? The highest devotee is one who sees the presence of the divine in everyone and in everything, and the presence of everyone in that divine. So, in other words, when you experience the presence of the divine in everyone, then you feel a kind of spiritual affinity, a kind of spiritual unity and oneness. The idea that creation is one spiritual family. You cannot love God without also being compassionate with our own fellow human beings. Now, this is a very interesting definition. You don't find such a definition in any other traditional sources, where God's name is not mentioned, worship is not mentioned, temple or a place of worship is not mentioned. What is mentioned is this spiritual affinity and oneness, the feeling of a spiritual oneness of creation, of existence. Now, after having said this, in the 25th verse, Lord Krishna makes a very, very simple statement. And that is a very well-known verse. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachadi tadaham bhakti upakridam asnami prayatatmanaha. What it says is, you can offer to the Lord either a leaf. Patra means a leaf of a plant or a tree. Nothing very significant. A flower, a fruit, or some water. The water may be from the ocean, from the well, from a lake or a stream, from a river. A leaf, any leaf that grows in your backyard, any fruit, but one point is mentioned, that the bhakti upakrita means that which is dedicated, offered to the Lord with bhakti. Bhakti means the divine love. So, anyone, whoever offers me, here, asnami, I eat it or I accept it. That is the word used here. I. So Lord Krishna here identifying himself, because of the realized state, he identifies himself with this all-pervading divine reality. Well, you can also interpret this in the context of simple traditional religion, any faith system. So what do we offer to the Lord? A big marble structure? We can do that. A lot of, you can find in many places of worship, Hindu temples, we don't mention any place of worship. Lot of costly things. Huge piles of wonderful delicious food items are offered, clothes are offered, and people donate billions of dollars sometimes, millions and billions of dollars they offered. And here what the Lord says is something very interesting. If you offer with devotion, with divine love, bhakti upakridam, means filled with this divine love, if you offer a leaf, a fruit, a little water, or maybe a flower, not even a garland, if you offer, I accept as the devout gift of the pure-hearted devotee. In other words, the bhakti, as we understand, or devotion, that is the crucial point. And this you find mentioned in many traditional religions, the insistence on the purity of the heart, purity of devotion, is what actually compels the Lord to accept our gift. Because this is a very simple. Now, there's not much metaphysics in this. I think this is one of the most straightforward, one of the simplest verses in the entire Gita text, maybe, in any traditional religious text. God tells you, you give me a leaf from a plant or a tree that grows in your backyard, or maybe anything that you can pick up, a flower, a fruit, or at least whatever is, these things may be difficult, maybe a few drops of water. So what we are offering is not a leaf of fruit or water or flower. We are offering ourselves. We are offering our hearts. The very simplicity, the very bluntness of the statement is meant to insist that it is the heart that God demands and not anything precious or costly. So, because behind a leaf, there will be a pure heart. Behind maybe little water, there is a pure heart. So you find in Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna puts it in a very simple language. He says, if you go to a home or any place of worship. Now remember, there is no condemnation of big elaborate rituals or big offerings. That we should always remember. In Vedanta and the Gita, there is no condemnation of anything. Even if you offer, let us say, a huge lunch or breakfast meal, spending $1 million, or if you build a place of worship, spending $1 billion, that this also will be accepted by the Lord. But if it is done with devotion. So, to emphasize the point that it is devotion that's the crucial item that the Lord wants, to emphasize the point, these examples are given here. A leaf, the leaf becomes sacred, precious, costly when there is a loving heart behind the leaf. A few drops of water, or an ordinary fruit, or a flower, anything. You can find many stories. So in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna says, if you go to a place, well, suppose you find somebody is offering a huge collection of choicest, most delicious items you offer. Well, but then there is a lot of big, elaborate display of splendor. It is called Rajasiga Bhakti, means that this is also bhakti, but it is not the most sublime form of devotion. It is still devotion. It is accepted as devotion, but it is not the most sublime form. But if you go to a place where a person, he has a humble hut and he has a crude room, a very rudimentary place where he has kept a photo or a picture of some deity whom he worships, and has got maybe a torn seat on which he sits, and maybe he has got a glass of water, maybe just a small tiny apple that he may have bought some days ago. He doesn't have anything else. But you can find a person spends a lot more time in meditation. Not so much of rituals, but a lot of meditation, a lot of humility. It is called Sattvika Bhakti. On the other hand, there are some other bhaktas. They make a lot of noise. A Rajasika Bhakta may appear to be very philosophical, composed, calm and quiet, wonderful. But he also big show, big golden colored, splendorous items offered to worship, big garlands, several delicious items offered. It's Rajasika Bhakti. But there is another kind of bhakta or bhakti, devotion, where he is lazy, is ignorant. So what he does, the place is dirty and he offers in a very indifferent way. That is Tamasika Bhakti. Now here, this is the patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. Tadaham bhakti upahrudam asnami prayadatmarha. This is the prayer. I accept. Asnami means I eat. That's the real meaning. Asnami means I eat. Means I accept what this dry leaf that you're offering. Maybe a few drops of water you're offering. Maybe a flower, not a very wonderful flower. Maybe, and also you may be offering perhaps something that's not costly. But one important point is tadaham bhakti upahrudam. When it is offered with a loving heart, with a pure devotion, then I accept this. The other offerings also the Lord accepts. But the point is, that is not the highest form of devotion. That is not condemned here, but that is only a stage that you have to go through. So, this is one of the most well-known verses. I mentioned this some time back. This can be explained in the light of a story. There is no greater work than Bhagavad Purana itself, which tells the story. Lord Krishna was, he was a student in a school, let's say in maybe a forest hermitage school. And the teacher of the school was Sandipani. Sandipani was an ancient sage. He used to run a forest school, hermitage. And he had a friend, a classmate. Lord Krishna was a prince, he was born a prince, but his classmate was a humble person, a humble villager who did not have much money or anything. So after the graduation, after for 12 years of studying in a school, they normally leave their school and they marry, later they go back to their homes. In the text itself, it says, Lord Krishna lived only for 64 days in that village school, in that forest school. But this Sudama, this friend, lived and studied for 12 years. So, Ahoratrai Sadusastya Sampatto Tavati Kala. About Lord Krishna's education, Bhagavad Purana tells you, he lived for 64 days and studied 64 arts and sciences. The list of the different branches of learning that were taught in those schools are listed here, which I'm not going to give details. So the point is, then they left the school. Lord Krishna lived only for 64 days in that village school, and Sudama lived, his friend, the humble poor man, the friend, lived for 12 years. Years passed. After several decades, maybe a few decades, both of them had entered their own householder's life. Krishna became a great king, a prince. He built his own city in Dwaraka. He was living there. And a poor man, a humble Brahmin, he lived in his own tiny hut. He had his children, his humble wife. Both were very pious, but they didn't have money. And the wife used to tell her husband, Sudama, your classmate, your friend, Lord Krishna is the great prince, is a lot of wealth. Lakshmi is his wife, a lot of wealth. Why don't you go and ask him for some favor, some help to improve your financial condition? Sudama said, no, he is such a great man, and our friendship cannot be judged in terms of helping to improve my financial status. It is much more sacred. I can't do that. Finally, he had to listen to his wife's entreaties, and one day he left to meet his old friend. Walking several miles, he reached Dwaraka. It's a big palace. Krishna was living there as a great king. But when an old friend goes to meet his classmate after some decades, he has to take with him some gift. So he didn't have anything in his home, the Sudama, the poor man. He only some parched paddy. It means rice, some kind of paddy which is trampled and becoming flat, and it becomes rice. You put in water, some wet rice-like thing. Not even real rice, but something that they eat, parched rice or something. That he took a little in his hand, and he tied it in a cloth. He didn't have anything, some torn piece of cloth he had. He tied it. That he was very much ashamed to show outside. So he was hiding it inside somewhere, and he went to Dwaraka. Lord Krishna found, he was very happy. So he rushed to the gate, received him. Then he found, you are hiding something behind. What is that which you want to hide from me? So the old man, the poor friend, was so ashamed of showing this little parched rice, which is symbolic for his poverty-stricken conditions at home, But Lord, no, I want that. And he grabbed it from this man's hands and ate it. So this story goes. So he took it 3 times, 3 handsful of parched rice. He filled his mouth and ate. And then he stopped. Okay. Then Sudama lived in Krishna's palace for some days. After some days, it was time for him to return. He was already walking back towards his home, several miles. Suddenly the thought occurred to him. He completely forgot the mission of his visit. He wanted to seek some help from Krishna to improve his financial conditions, so that he can feed his children properly, he can look after his family, his wife and parents properly. But he had completely forgotten all about this, because he was so overjoyed in the holy company of Krishna. But when he reached his village, he could not locate his home. He found his home had disappeared. It appears to be a new world, a new country. He found several mansions on the spot where his little hut stood once. And then after some time he was looking around. Suddenly some well-dressed, well-fed children rushed to to the gate to receive him, they were his own children. And his wife also appeared different. So the house had changed, wife's appearance had changed, children's appearance had changed. Because Krishna had taken 3 handfuls of parched rice from him. Means all his material conditions, his spiritual life, everything underwent a complete transformation. So the point is, Krishna, and then there's a long discussion in the Dwaraka. How wonderful your gift is. You brought this gift of very ordinary parched rice you have brought from your home. It is so delicious. Krishna spoke for a long time praising the high quality of this ordinary parched rice that he grabbed from his old friend's pouch. Now, you can see this. There are many such stories, many traditions you find. So it is not what you give that matters, but it's the heart with which you give that really matters. At the same time, we should not get away with the impression that we can give to the Lord whatever we want. Suppose a person who is quite well off, and he takes something from the streets and give, it doesn't become an offering to the Lord. That's an important point, remember. It's not like that. When you want to give something with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, you should also have a sense of value of what you give. That's an important thing. So that's also, we should have a sense of value. Not only that, we should be giving to the Lord something that we consider as precious. Many people may not be able to make an offering of a few drops of water with a lot of devotion. So such people should try to offer bigger things. And when they reach a stage where the mind is naturally flowing to the Lord, then they can sit and they can mentally offer their hearts to the Lord. In fact, there is a verse in Shankaracharya's well-known poetical work, which actually gives a beautiful description of the spiritual psychology of a devotee, the highest form of devotion. The verse is this: Atmatum girijamati sahajara prana shariram griham pujate vishayopabhogarajana nidra samadhisthiti sanchara padayoho pradakshana sotrani sarvagiro yadyad karma garodi dattadaghilam shambhu tavarathanam. This is being quoted by many modern commentators like Tilak and others who wrote Gita Ragasya on the next verse. So this also equally applies to the present verse. What it means is, for the highest devotee, oh Lord, you are my Atman, my soul, and who are my friends? My friends are my own pranas, vital energies, and my body is your holy shrine. And then all my actions, all my ordinary interactions, even the activities engaged in our everyday life, eating food, working in the office, looking after our responsibilities and duties, all these are offering. Pujate vishayopabhogarajana. What is puja? I mean my worship, my offering, my worship at the shrine. Everything that I do, every act, every word, every thought is a form of puja. Puja means worship. So there's an evolution that happens. When we begin our life, our spiritual life, we often, we may meditate, do puja for some time in the morning and evening, and then the rest of our lifetime activities, we consider those activities as secular or non-spiritual activities. So spiritual activities for 2 hours, 3 hours a day. The rest of the day we may spend in secular activities. So there is a division, a dividing line, a line of bifurcation between the secular and the spiritual. But as we evolve further in our spiritual life, spirituality slowly begins to enter into every act, every activity that we engage in. Whatever may be the activity, speaking, every word becomes, a sacred mantra. Stotrani sarvagiro, in this same verse Shankaracharya says. So slowly spirituality begins to manifest in all our activities, thoughts and words and deeds. And then sanchara padayohu pradakshana vidhi. So when we walk, padayoha sanchara means when we walk with our feet, that is actually like going around circumambulation, going around a sacred shrine. So every movement, when we walk, every movement is like going around a temple. So that is also a spiritual activity. Secular activities, Vishayopabhoga Rachana means secular activities, normal activities, people doing business to make money, teaching in a university, working in a factory, which involves activities meant for preserving the family duties, everything. Not particularly spiritual. Normally we do not consider we are engaged in spiritual activities when we work in a hospital as a doctor, when we teach in a university as a teacher, or when we work in a factory. We don't consider that a spiritual activity. But that also is a spiritual activity. It is called Pujate Vishayobhogha Rachana. Means even the ordinary empirical worldly activities become puja. Puja means worship, spiritual activity. And then Padayoha Sancharaha means when we walk with our feet, that becomes the sacred ritual of going around a shrine, which is Pradakshana means circumambulation. And Stotrani Sarvagira, whatever we speak, every word, that becomes a sacred hymn. So, whatever we do, yad karma karodi, whatever I do, that becomes an act of worship. Now, this is actually an expansion of the next verse, which we are going to discuss. But I thought I would better mention this in connection with this particular 26th verse that we discussed just now. So, when we reach this stage, then patram pushpam phalam toyam, it's okay. When we reach this state of spiritual evolution, when every word becomes sacred, every moment becomes sacred, every activity becomes an act of worship, then we can mentally offer one leaf, one fruit, a few drops of water. It will be accepted by the Lord, because it is not what we give in terms of the tangible, visible thing that the Lord accepts, but it is the heart with which that we give that really matters. Of course, this is a very common principle in all great traditional religious mystical concepts you can find. The heart that we give with other things, that really makes it sacred, that makes it a spiritual thing. In continuation of this, the next verse is very famous. Yad karoshi, yad asnasi, yad juhoshi, dadasi, yad tapasyasi kaunteya, tad kurushamadarpanam. So, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, and whatever you give a gift of others, to give to others, whatever you practice, whatever austerities that you practice, do that as an offering to me. So, this is the highest state of a spiritual man or spiritual woman, where the bridge between spirituality and secular activities is completely connected. As I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of our spiritual evolution, spiritual life, these are two watertight compartments. Spirituality one thing, secular activities another. And then slowly we try to connect these two with a bridge. So spirituality slowly begins to enter the secular world, secular activities. That's why, puja te vishayobha rajana, that is Shankaracharya's words. Every secular activity becomes a puja or a worship. Why? Because slowly spirituality enters the world of secular activities. In other words, the spiritualization of the secular. That's an important thing to remember. And then what happens slowly, we are able to do work as an act of worship. Slowly, the difference between worship and work disappears. So you don't say you work as worship, because when there is no distinction at all, you don't have to use work as worship, because everything becomes worship. So that is the genius of this particular verse from Shankaracharya, which is considered to be the most sublime articulation of this idea of spiritualizing the secular. Atmatvam girijamatihi. See, you are my Atman, you are the soul, you are my soul. You are essentially, you are residing in my heart. And my friends are sahachara, means my own vital energies. And my secular activities, whatever I do, in the factory, in the office, in the business area, wherever it is, all these actually it's not business, it is worship. So puja te vishayobha rachana. Remember, this is a statement that comes from a great monk. And he says, even a householder doing householder's duties, taking care of children, taking care of the business activities, running a shop perhaps, all that can become puja. Everything becomes an offering. Why? Because you are offering with your heart. This is patram pushpam phalam toyam, the previous verse which I discussed just now. Everything you are offering with your heart. And then padayoho sancharaha. Sanchara means every movement with the feet. You walk, you go around a sacred shrine, and that we consider as a spiritual activity. But you walk from one place to another place, that is also actually an act of circumambulation, because the Lord is present everywhere. So if you think that God is sitting in a shrine, in a building, or in a room, and you go around it, that's good at the beginning. That is a kindergarten or circumambulation. But as you graduate further to higher stages of spiritual life, walking from one place to another place, driving from one place to another place also becomes pradakshana vidhi. Pradakshana means going around, circumambulation. It becomes going around, circumambulating the sacred shrine. Why? Because the whole creation, the whole world is a sacred shrine. So you cannot think of any specific place where alone God is living. So, stotrani sarva giraha. So whatever comes out of the mouth, that is gira means words. Words that come out of our mouth, they are sacred hymns. Stotrani sarva gira. All words as a literal meaning. Every word that you speak is a sacred mantra. slowly the line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual disappears. The secular becomes spiritual. In fact, the secular merges in the spiritual. The so-called worldly activities cease to be worldly activities. They become spiritual activities. And the final expression is yad yad karma karomi tat tat akhilam shambho tavarathanam. So whatever I do, whatever activity I engage in, it becomes a kind of offering, praying, meditation on the Lord. In the next verse, the 27th verse that we just discussed, there are a few verbs which are used here, For example, yet karoshi, what it means, whatever we do. Now, in other words, whatever actions you do. Karoshi means whatever you do. Whatever you do, anything that we think we are doing, well, think of the agent of action. The Lord is the agent of action. And then ashnasi means whatever you eat. Whatever we do for mere survival, whatever is biologically necessary for our physical survival, food is necessary, water is necessary for thirst and hunger. So we can't say, I'm eating my lunch, I'm drinking water when I feel thirsty. Well, it is an offering to the Lord. But that is the highest state of spirituality, when the secular merges with the spiritual. And Juhoshi actually means you do these elaborate Vedic rituals. I mentioned this earlier. There are 14 different types of Vedic rituals mentioned in the Sapta Haviri Yajna, Sapta Soma Yajnas. Some of them require very elaborate preparations, maybe millions of dollars in a big scale. Hundreds of people should participate. These are all Vedic rituals. Only few of them survive to our time, in our times. So, all these also a kind of offering. In fact, if you spend millions of dollars and perform a big ritual, it is in no way superior to offering a leaf, a few drops of water, a flower, or a fruit to the Lord with pure heart. So that is an early statement. That's very important, 26th statement. In fact, Ramanujacharya, the great Vaishnava, the great devotee, he writes in this commentary on the Gita, Sarvasulabham patram va pushpam va phalam va toyam va yo bhaktya me prayachati. He says the dry leaf is very simple. Now you don't have to travel a long distance to get leaf, patram. Pushpam, one flower, it is singular that is used, pushpam. You don't have to travel long distances. And then toya means water. Either water or flower or leaf, fruit. So he says sarva sulabham, it is everywhere, easy to get, not difficult, no expenses involved. So sarva sulabham patram va pushpam va phalam va toyam va yo bhaktya me prayachati. Anyone who offers to me with true devotion a leaf or a flower, a fruit or water, which can be of course easily obtained, sarva sulabham, then he says atyartham mat priyataya mat pradhanena vina atmadharanam alabhamanataya. I mean, when you reach a point where you cannot live in this world without making this offering. So, a stage is reached where you cannot survive, you cannot live in this world without being a devotee. There is no option. Devotion or spirituality is not one of the several options. It becomes the only option. Now this is possible even for a man living in this world. That's an important thing to remember. That's what it implies. Whatever you do as an offering. That's what Shankaracharya makes clear in the Shiva Manasa Puja Stotram. Puja te Vishayobhog Rachana. See, Vishayobhog Rachana means whatever you do as a part of your normal, secular, worldly activities. Not inside a temple. You're sitting in an office, doing business transactions, maybe you're a trader. These are obviously not spiritual activities. But that also can become puja. That's what Shankaracharya says. And here Ramanuja says, this state of mind can be reached only when you cannot sustain yourself without making such an offering. So, when you reach a point where you can't but be a devotee, you can't live but as a devotee. Tadega prayojino yome patradikam dadadi tasya predatmanaha. So, the point is, there is no other purpose behind, no other motive behind, but this is natural, spontaneous activity, the physical and emotional, intellectual level. That is the highest state of bhakti. At that stage, you can, of course, offer the most insignificant things to the Lord, but with a pure heart. That's the idea behind. The dasi is another word we used this year in this 27th verse. Means social activities. So you can remember that verse. If you have got, you can go back and listen. 27th verse. What is the 27th verse we discuss now? Yet karoshi, yet asnasi, yet jugoshi, dadasi. So 4 verbs are used, indicating 4 types of activities. One is yet karoshi, whatever you do, any kind of activities. Physical activities. Asnasi, whatever you eat, corresponds to whatever we do just to sustain, biologically sustain our life. Eating food, drinking water for hunger and thirst. And of course, elaborate rituals also can become an act of worship. The dasi means whatever you kind of giving to somebody. Say, for example, you offer something to somebody, that is the dasi. Whatever you offer, giving some philanthropy, you send a check, you give help to people living in the maybe in places affected by natural calamities. That is not a donation that you give to them, but is a puja, an act of worship that you are offering to the Lord. Then what happens, we are able to practice a kind of detachment, and we are able to practice a kind of inner contentment. Because when we do even the smallest or biggest thing with a sublime spiritual attitude, it becomes a kind of spirituality that is overflowing, where secular merges with the spiritual. Life becomes exclusively, completely spiritualized. That's the uniqueness of these 2 verses, 26th and 27th. And now we can have interactions. You are most welcome to ask questions. Yeah.
So, how would you define bhakti? Like, is bhakti the sincerity with which the leaf is given? Is that what bhakti is?
Yeah. Bhakti can be simply defined as love for God. So, devotion is nothing but love for God. So that's how it is. Of course, there are different definitions, different stages. But it begins with some kind of acknowledging the reality of a higher divine entity beyond everything. So at that stage, we may make a distinction between the secular and spiritual, worldly and spiritual. But as we step into spiritual life, as we advance further, slowly you find the spiritual thoughts comes to our mind even when we are engaged in the so-called secular activities. So bhakti becomes deeper. So Bhakti Sutras define bhakti as the spontaneous, natural flow of devotion to the Lord. That's the definition.
Swamiji, this might be sort of a sacrilegious question, but why does God care that we love Him or devote ourselves to God or worship? Is it more for our own well-being? I'm just saying, why does God or Supreme Reality or Brahman, why does it care if we love him, her, it, whatever?
In fact, why should we care or recognize or love God? He is a Supreme Reality. That is true. Buddha did not accept or believe in the kind of God that other religious traditions talk about, So, but you can find Buddha himself became a god for Buddhists, really. They may not openly acknowledge that Buddha is a god, but that's how the respect that other religious traditions give to the founders of the religious traditions of the idea of God. That's what Buddhists give to Buddha. So in other words, spirituality can be defined as the manifestation of the higher qualities, spiritual qualities present in us. When we develop those qualities, normally we recognize certain things which a worldly person may not be willing or maybe may not be ready to recognize. When that happens, we actually begin our spiritual journey. It is not for God's sake that we are loving God. God doesn't demand that. In fact, Vedanta doesn't talk about a God who compels you to turn to Him, who forces you to turn to Him. Vedanta is not talking about it. But Vedanta says, Gita, Lord Krishna himself says, he doesn't say if you want, you turn to me, otherwise you'll be completely, nothing like that. No. This is an important thing to remember. In the Gita, he's talking about certain qualities, and when we develop these qualities, you cannot help conceiving of a higher spiritual reality. And that higher spiritual reality is called God. This is an important thing to remember. So when you cannot deny the importance of these spiritual qualities. For example, looking upon other fellow human beings, or doing whatever we do with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. These values have got a psychological significance, even for preserving our health, mental and physical health. A sense of sanctity and sacredness, all these values are very helpful to preserve our psychological health. You can imagine that, really speaking. Now, I quote this, but I don't need to quote, a man like Jung, who rejected Sigmund Freud later on. He found a need to believe in God, even for psychological, psychiatric health. And he emphasized again and again that one of the main crucial reasons, one of the central causes, most important causes for many of the problems were proliferating in those days, 1930s, because people were losing faith in God. So faith in God is a psychological necessity. Now the point is, it's not a tool for psychological health. But Vedanta goes far beyond that. It says, when you develop these qualities, you naturally believe in the reality of something that goes beyond the world of everyday experiences. It's a natural evolution of human consciousness when we develop these qualities that are mentioned here. So whatever you do, whatever. Not only that, I can tell you another thing. In the Gita itself, there are certain verses where instead of God, Loka Sangraha is mentioned. So this is a word used in Gita. Loka Sangraha means doing good for others. There is a context where Krishna tells Arjuna, if you cannot believe in anything, do whatever you do, but don't be selfish, because selfishness hurts yourself. Selfishness may not hurt others as much as it hurts our own mind. People suffer all kinds of problems, because they always relate everything they do to their own individual life. In what way it's going to affect me or not going to affect me. So Lord Krishna gives an alternate suggestion. He says, Chigyushu Loka Sangraham. If you can't believe in a God, you do everything possible for the good of others. That's what Buddha said, who did not believe in God. So Buddha is an example, a classic example of somebody, a teacher, who replaced the word God with Loka Sangraham, meaning doing good for others. So some degree of moving beyond our own little world of selfishness and self-interest, it is a psychological necessity for human survival. This is an important thing. You follow? So you can imagine the value and significance of belief in spirituality. Again, you have fully justified. Many people ask this question and they don't get an answer from many traditional established religions. Why should God insist, you are turned to me, you worship me, otherwise I'll thrash you? Why should a compassionate, all-wise, omnipotent God will tell me, and he threatened me, will you listen to me, you obey me, otherwise we face the consequences? Krishna doesn't say that. What Krishna tells him, you do whatever you do with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. So this is an important thing. So when Shankaracharya says Puja te Vishyo Bhoga Rajana, it is actually from Shiva Manasa Puja Stotram. But Shankaracharya was speaking about, in his commentaries, is speaking about a God that goes beyond rituals, beyond temples, beyond formal rituals and conventional definitions of God. He's talking about a divine spirit that is present everywhere, present within us also. He's not talking about an anthropomorphic God, but a all-pervading divine spirit. So it is, in its most practical utilitarian sense, belief in some kind of a transcendental spiritual value is a matter of psychological survival. That's it. Jung discovered this 1930s, almost 100 years ago. Just imagine. So, and it is becoming more and more obvious in our own times, really speaking. Okay, so thank you. Now we have an important announcement.
Swamiji, there is a question on YouTube.
Most welcome. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So it's from Mark Goodrich.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the man Lokmanya Tilak?
Oh, Tilak. Tilak was a great freedom fighter. In a way, you can say one of the early generation, Gopala Krishna Gokhale and Tilak. Most of his activities were centered around Bombay, city of Bombay. Both Tilak and Gokhale. You will understand if I tell you that Tilak was one of the great leaders who inspired Mahatma Gandhi into India's freedom struggle. It's very important. Tilak was one of the early leaders. He was the president of the Indian National Congress. And when he passed away, Gandhi returned from South Africa. So the best way to introduce Tilak is to say that he was one of the major inspirations for Mahatma Gandhi to launch India's freedom movement. It was started much earlier, 19th century. Tilak was the senior contemporary of Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah, he was just several years senior to Gandhi as a political leader. It's an important thing. Okay, and the well-known book Gita Rahasya, which he wrote when he was in prison, is one of the well-known interpretations. Which he wrote in Indian vernacular Marathi, but actually translated into English. It is one of the more elaborate interpretations of Gita, written in modern times. I mean, late 19th century. So if you look at the history of interpretative literature of the Bhagavad Gita, you can divide these interpretations into two categories. One is the classical interpretations, beginning with Shankaracharya up to 19th century, middle of 19th century. From middle of 19th century onwards, you can find Tilak wrote commentaries, Gandhi wrote his own commentaries, many others in 20th century also wrote. So Tilak's commentary is one of the better known commentaries on the Gita. It is available in English translation, of course. He was a very great scholar of Sanskrit, got a prodigious knowledge of India's ancient literature, Sanskrit. So an interesting figure. Was a great political leader, but was a great classical scholar of ancient scriptures and Sanskrit. That's it. Okay. Gandhi was not so much of a scholar. Gandhi was more of a practitioner of Karma Yoga. So Gandhi himself admits, Gandhi wrote with the help of Mahadev Desai. But Tilak, unlike Gandhi, was an astounding scholar of classical literature and Sanskrit, and is well known for that. And he had a meeting with Swami Vivekananda. It is believed by many that Tilak was also inspired by Swami Vivekananda. They met together, I think, in the city of Pune, when Swami Vivekananda was traveling all over India. He happened to meet Tilak. So, okay, thank you. There is no more question. I will read these announcements. So, the announcement. There will be no Bhagavad Gita class next Friday, November 26th, because you know, 25th is the Thanksgiving Day. So, people will be mostly out of town. They'll be busy otherwise. So, we will have no Gita class next Friday, November 26th. The next Bhagavad Gita class will be on December the 3rd at 7:30 p.m. in this hall. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.